Yeah, take it away.
Right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. As I told some of you this morning, I've got a dodgy knee, so it's my excuse to sit down. Are you all right with the lights on, or do you want some of the lights off so you can go to sleep? You're okay. Yes, we've got a book table over there. My wife Amanda, who's here, is going to be superintending it. There is a couple of free gifts there if you're quick enough. But we've greatly reduced the price of the books because we realised something called Christmas, if you heard of that, is just coming up. So if you want to elucidate, enlighten or whatever, you can pass it on as presents. So here's the thing we're going to do tonight, Evidence for the Bible. We have a book that's based on this. At the back here, you can just see some of the head. Where am I? Where's my red thingy? There it is. I don't know if you can just see it at the back there. That is, well, some people have said it was Claudius. Now they're thinking it's Nero. There's a mask that's there of him. Right, here we go. See what happens. Righto. We obviously didn't want to see it, did we? So. Go on, you're... Right, the first dead body I'm going to show you is of Ramesses II. Traditionally, he is considered the Pharaoh of the Exodus. If you've seen the great film The Ten Commandments with Yul Brynner, who looked absolutely splendid as a Pharaoh. But here he is. I think he's too late, if you actually look at the dating. His mummified remains have now just been moved to another museum in Cairo. His mummified remains have caused a lot of controversy because when it was first examined, they found that in his lungs he had nicotine. Now, as far as we can tell, no one had been smoking around him. And so they wonder whether or not the Egyptians had gone over to America, even before the Vikings and Columbus. And so there you go, something to think about. So here he is. Now, am I going to try and do this or what? Oh, there you go. He is the only pharaoh that we know of with a passport. It's because his mortal remains were starting to deteriorate, and the good people in Paris said, if you send him over, we can renovate him for you. The problem was that the British had had such an impact in Egypt that they wouldn't let any of their citizens out of the country without a passport. So, believe it or not, a photographer went into the royal mummy room and produced two portraits like that, passport-sized photographs, and on the back of one, someone had to write, "I certify that this is the true likeness of." And the real problem was, what's his profession? He died round about 1240, so you can see what they put on there. Can you see it up there?
Profession,
King deceased, so there you go. So they took him over to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, and the good people in Paris wouldn't let him off the plane until he produced his passport. So it's an amazing thing, isn't it? So there you go. You can see the approximate date of his birth and all the rest of it. The one that I think is probably the Pharaoh of the Exodus is called Tothmosis III, the mightiest commander of Egyptian forces, the greatest general. He went up to a place called Megiddo and did all sorts of things there. Some of you may have heard of Armageddon. Well, he was there a long time beforehand. And this is a wonderful portrait here in granite that has been carved of him, and that's his actual mummified remains. If we are right, and we can't say we are 100% true in that, but if we are right, I find it staggering, because you can go and see his mummy as well, that potentially you're looking into the face of the man who looked into the face of Moses and Aaron, and I find that really staggering. So there we are. Right, move. Here's his tomb. If you look on the left, you'll see his sarcophagus just there. I hope you can see that. But round it, there's all these paintings there on the walls. It's known as the Hours of the Amduat, the 12 hours of the day and 12 hours of the night. And after you go around and look at them, just over here you'll see this big block. I don't know if I can show you or not on there, possibly, just there. Above the sarcophagus, a big block of blue water. And what is staggering, you'll see it here, it's drawn out, it's a line drawing, that in the blue water they have depicted the bodies of soldiers who have drowned in a sea. And if you know the account of in Exodus of the Egyptian army drowned in the Red Sea, there is probably a link to it there. It's amazing. It looks like pictures of matchstick men as well, doesn't it? So there we are. So those who had died without proper burial. If you know London at all, there is an obelisk that is known mistakenly of Cleopatra's Needle. Nothing to do with Cleopatra, everything to do with Tothmosis III, the Pharaoh of the Exodus, as I believe. So if you go down to London and see it there, it's very close to the riverbank. You will see there his inscription on it. And it was brought over. One of the governors there in Egypt allowed it to come across, and it was set up in London. And there was a saying, if I can remember it, on the side, someone actually put on it, here is this thing that was seen in the time of Moses, as was supposed, but has now been put up here by order of the Clerk of Works. So there we are. It's amazing to think that. When looking at evidence for the Bible, this is known as the Meneptah Stele. Israel in Canaan, the Pharaoh Meneptah in 1209 BC, refers to Israel as a people group. This fits the time of the Judges. And you see we've exploded it. It's over here is the original, and we've exploded it over there, so you can see Israel is no more. So that is amazing to think that that is there. It's a huge block as well. King David is often considered to be a legendary hero until they started to find all these things coming out of the ground. This is known as the Tel Dan Inscription. Dan is in the north of Israel, and it was written in 796 BC, over almost 200 years after King David, but they've actually got his name there. You can see it in white, telling us about King David. So there are evidences for these things literally written in the stones. Where am I? Then the king of Noab here is known as the Mesha Stele, or the Moabite tome. He refers to the house of David as well. So we have many of these things, and it's almost year on year now, many things are coming out of the ground which refer to the accuracy of the Bible. Whether or not you believe its message is another thing, but the accuracy of the Bible should not be misunderstood. Here we have, and you'll see here, if I can highlight it, you'll see this layout here of the altar that was built by order of Jeroboam up in Tel Dan. What Jeroboam had done is he had confused the people. The people had been told that they are to go and to worship God in Jerusalem and in the great temple there. But Jeroboam came along and he decided to change the way that religion was taught and dealt with in Israel. So right in the north of the country, he had this other altar built. The bits at the top, you can probably just see, I can get hold of it, there, they are known as the horns of the altar, and the sacrifice was on top of it. So what Jeroboam did, he told people, well, if it's too far to go to Jerusalem, it's all right, you can go up to Dan. You don't have to walk so far, and you can have the same sacrifice. But God never gave that indication. He said, I want you to go to Jerusalem. And this is how what we call heresy starts. It's where you just deviate a little bit. And then if you follow it, it leads right away from the truth of God. So that's what he did. It's a huge thing. You can see the size of some people there. Here's an Assyrian king called Shalmaneser III. The Kirka stele regards the Battle of Karkar in 853, which included, and it's on the back of this, Ahab the Israelite. If you don't know the story in the book of Kings about Ahab and Jezebel, do read it, because he is a king who's undoubtedly included in the inscriptions that there are. Then we have something called the Black Obelisk. It's an obelisk and it's black, that's why it's called the Black Obelisk, all right? So all these clever things that we have. But in the second register down, we have this. We have Shalmaneser, who we've referred to, refers to Jehu. Here he is bowing down low. There he is, Jehu, bringing him tribute. Jehu, who in the older version of the Bible says he rode the chariot furiously. Well, there he is. What is interesting is the script that we have running round here is the cuneiform script that runs round, and you can see it. And that is the Apostle Paul's example. Check it out in 1 Corinthians 14, but that is the Apostle Paul's example of speaking in tongues, which is quite a surprise. So have a look and see what is said there, 1 Corinthians 14. And this is an example of it for us. Another Assyrian king called Sargon records his defeat of Samaria, the capital of Israel in the north, in the year 722 BC. And this was found at the place where Jesus met the woman at the well. If you know John chapter 4, particularly verse 9, it's something that was discovered there and tells us about this Assyrian king. Sargon is the king of Assyria who people said never lived, because his only mention in the Bible is in Isaiah 20 verse 1. But then they found not only his great city, but also many inscriptions. And here he is on the right with his son Sennacherib on the left. So just because you appear once in the Bible doesn't mean that you are fiction. And people don't doubt he lived at all. This is the great city of Nineveh. Please get the pronunciation right. It's not Nivea, not Nineveh. It's Nineveh, okay? So I don't know what you're saying when you go to your Bible to the Sunday school class, but it's Nineveh, V-E-H. And what we have here is, on the right, is a Google map picture of it, what's known as Inner Nineveh. And this is where a Mona came. We call him the Mona because we read his book in the Old Testament, and he's known as Jonah the Mona. He's always having a whinge. He's like many church members, isn't he? And God says, I want you to go to Nineveh, and he said, not on your life. And so this is where he was meant to come. So he went down instead to Joppa, modern-day Jaffa, took ship and sailed out across the Mediterranean. We think this Phoenician ship, there's the stone carving on the left, and here's a mock-up of it, is the type of ship that Jonah would have taken. We also know that in the far-off days, from the end of March to the beginning of September, that was the time when you travelled across the Mediterranean. If you went in the more autumnal or winter months, you never did, because there's so many violent storms. And we think that Jonah went in the safe period, but God judged him for disobeying him and sent a violent storm against him. And so we see that the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah 1:17. Now that poor little creature that's flying through the air next to the great white shark is bigger than me. And you can see how enormous, what's known as the maw, the mouth that's opened, that could have swallowed that in one go. So there is a lot of interesting, what type of fish did God provide? We do not know, but we very much doubt it was a whale, because whales don't have big enough throats to swallow something this large in one go. Here is an enormous great white shark, something the largest ever discovered. It's known as Deep Blue, and there she is. There is this lady in the top picture on the right-hand side called Ocean Ramsey, who likes swimming with great white sharks. As far as I know, she still does. I wouldn't fancy it because I think I would disappear. I would become the fish's meal, let alone having a fish meal. There she is. And so the bottom left, we're trying to give it an approximate size. There is the human beard of 6 foot or 1.8 metres, and Deep Blue at least at 21 feet, 6.4 metres. She's grown since then, and there she is on the right-hand side, coming up against all these people who actually pay money to get into a cage to go down to be with her. Isn't that sensible enough? But there we go. So here she is. Now, we have all been coloured by Pinocchio. I don't know if you've seen the wonderful Disney cartoon, but we find that Pinocchio and his father get swallowed by a whale. Did you know it is based on the Jonah story? Fact. The trouble is, when you look inside the whale, you can see its backbone and its ribs. They have to have a table, a door with a bell on it, and all the rest of it. What I think is ironic, there is a little goldfish bowl as well. Sorry, which I pressed the wrong one. Should have been that one. The goldship fish bowl, and a fish in a fish again. But people have thought of Jonah in this way, as though Jonah would have been able to sit upright and everything. If he was inside the insides of a great fish, he wouldn't have been. I have a theory, which I cannot prove, but I don't think that Jonah ever ate fish again. I think the smell would have put him off, as well as everything else. And here we have the great whale, it's called Monstra, vomiting out Pinocchio and his father. And that is what happened. In fact, that's why they use it, to Jonah. That God, after 3 days and 3 nights, as Jesus says, when people asked him for a sign, he said, I'm going to refer you to Jonah, 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, and that's what's going to happen to me. I'm going to be 3 days, 3 nights in the belly of the earth. And for Jonah, he was vomited out because God wanted him to do something else. So do watch Pinocchio, but watch it with Jonah in mind. Now here we go to Assyria, the people that Jonah was going to see. And we have here the carving on the left, and I hope you can see it on the right-hand side. It's known as an apkallu. They had fish deities. Isn't that amazing? So here you'll see the geezer with the fish's head above his. All the scales, the fish's tail coming down. And it's like he's inside the fish. Isn't that incredible? Inside the fish. So God was operating in ways that people can understand. And God always does that. And there's a stone carving of it as well. There are little figurines of it that have come from the time from Nineveh, from the time of Jonah. And you'll see these, if any of you go to the British Museum, you can see them. And then below, this is a great tank full of water. Now, we don't know what it's used for, ritual bathing, whatever it may be, but notice, all around the outside, you'll see these apkallu. There they are. They're all standing there with their fish. It's as though, because you've got water in a tank, you can have them. So maybe next time you have a baptism, you can consider doing something like that. But here we are. Now, we're going to have an interval now, and we're seal of Isaiah the prophet. If you actually look at the the left-hand side, you'll see how it's figured out in Hebrew. You will probably say, if you know anything about Hebrew, well, that's not the Hebrew that I know. This is the Hebrew from the time of Isaiah, because the script did change. It's another wonderful confirmation of these things being accurate. And so it is a seal. It's very small indeed, and it thrilled people when that was discovered. This is known as the Taylor Prism. This is a prism discovered by Colonel Taylor. So can you see why it's called the Taylor Prism? It's very imaginative, all this, isn't it, with the Black Obelisk. And the bit that's highlighted, and you'll see here the cuneiform script that the Apostle Paul, as I said, uses as an example of speaking in tongues. It says there that the great Assyrian king, we read about him in 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and the book of Isaiah, that Sennacherib claims that he shut Hezekiah in Jerusalem. And this is a famous little phrase that has come down from the ancient world, like a bird in a cage. And he did. He shut him in, but he didn't have the key to undo the lock of the cage door to let himself in or Hezekiah out. So it's a very useful thing. In fact, in respect to Sennacherib, you'll see we've got a little book on him over there. There is so much evidence, it's astonishing. So hopefully you will go back, even if you don't buy the little book, you go back and read in the Bible about him. He came up against all these Judean towns, and some of the warfare was absolutely awful, terrible. This is one that is called Lakeish, and you will see how they intimidated those who were against them. So if you look on the left, you may not want to look. Can you see these 4 people? They're hung up on a pole. In fact, it's inserted through the back passage. It is the forerunner of crucifixion. And crucifixion was developed from this because wickedly human beings said that you died too quickly. And so crucifixion is developed for longevity. So our Lord was meant to be, if you are a Christian, was meant to be on the cross for probably at least 2 days before he expired, even though they'd beaten him up. And if you know someone in Europe called Vlad the Impaler, Dracula nickname, he made that very famous. So here is Lakeish. And what is interesting, a lot of wall panels have been discovered from this time at Nineveh and brought back to the British Museum. There's a lot of argument as to whether or not the British stole them, but I'm not going down that way. The thing I like is because they're back in the places like the British Museum, they are safe. If they'd been left in Iraq with Islamic State, they would have been destroyed, undoubtedly. So what is interesting is you see that the Assyrians have their main forces going against the city gate, which is normally the strongest part of the city. But they had such overwhelming force that they wanted to destroy it and show that no one could stand against them. So this is Lakeish, which was the great city in Judea, where all the goods came in. And it was also because Jerusalem was so hot in the summer. If you can only go in the summer, please go and see Jerusalem. But I don't recommend August, otherwise you boil alive. And so they used to come down to Lakeish as the summer residence for the kings. So here is what's known as the Tel of Lakeish today. I often take groups there. I think it's a fabulous place. And you'll see the ramp that the Assyrians built to take the city, and you'll see where it's located there with the arrow. Here is Nineveh, where it was discovered, top left. Things were on those walls there. And on the bottom right, how it looks today. And it gives you an idea of the way the Iraqis have tried to preserve what's left by putting a tin roof over the top of it. Here is the start of the siege of Lakeish. This is known as raised relief, that the items were not carved into the stone, but it was knocked away, the stone was knocked away, so it raised it up. So in the ancient times they would paint it as well. So here you see all of these, or the start of all of these getting involved in the siege of Lakeish. with the bows and arrows that are there. What's interesting is the headwear. You'll see here the Assyrian soldiers' headwear, but these ones up here, which looks like a fancy crash helmet, they are Jews. They have been, as we would say, press-ganged to fight against their own people. And so it must have been a terrible time. Just behind the bows and arrows, we have these guys here on the left with the slings there, the slingshot. And these are an amazing weapon. Notice it's behind the bows and arrows, not in front of them, because these things travelled at an extraordinary velocity. You'll see between their legs there spare missiles. And what is really amazing, they found hundreds of these at Lakeish and they brought them back. Here is some in the British Museum. You'll see the sling that's there, but that is a replica because nothing from the ancient world has survived because of the fabric. To give you an idea of these slingshots, they're the size of a snooker ball. So if you've ever heard of anybody in the Bible being hit with a sling, oh, David and Goliath. Now you know why Goliath, it was goodnight sweetheart for him. Something the size of a snooker ball, straight, as the Hebrew says, straight in the middle there, wallop. It finished him off. We see that the Assyrians have won. Here we see refugees walking out of the city gate. And obviously they've compressed all the images because there's still the mayhem of war. You wouldn't have happened at the same time. You'll see that the Lakeishians are coming out. You'll notice again, if you look at the headwear that's there, and you'll see it's been a tough time because the animals are hungry. So you can see their rib cages there and count how many they've got. Punishment was enacted against the leaders of Lakeish. You may not want to either listen or look at this, all right? I'll give you a warning. You're still looking, right? So some of them were impaled, as there, but you'll notice that beforehand he's been tortured by having his hands and his feet cut off. Can you see them round here? So there we are. Others have been beheaded. Others have been taken. We think these are the two main leaders of Lakeish. I don't think my light's working now. We think they're probably Egyptian, that they are stretched out very tautly. If you find this difficult, please put your fingers in your ears right now and I can tell you when to come back, all right? And beginning at the heel and going up, they're being flayed alive. They're being skinned alive. And then their skin was fixed to the what's left of the city gate. So when you read the book of Isaiah or 2 Kings or 2 Chronicles, this was a dreadful time. We sometimes read these things without thinking about what would it have been like for them. Sennacherib, the king, is sat on his throne. You'll see him here. Because he had, after this time, gone and done terrible things down in Babylon. We think when Babylon joined a coalition of people in the year 611 BC, that they came along and it was a Babylonian soldier that actually took out Sennacherib's face. And you can see it there. To take out someone's face is to obliterate them. So you'll see on the side of the ivory-clad throne the different Assyrian gods. He sat there, and then his feet here are on his footstool. The footstool in the ancient world was very important. So here's one of Tutankhamun's. You may have heard of him. It's 99th anniversary since finding his tomb. So next year will be the 100th anniversary. And you'll see that carved on top of footstools was all the enemies of the king. So if you look at the faces, they're different ethnicity. And of course, this is the background to Psalm 110, verse 1. The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet, a great messianic psalm. So we can see how that is illustrated from the ancient world. Hezekiah's Jerusalem, at the time that Sennacherib was coming up against Hezekiah, you'll get an idea of what it may have looked like. Here we have what's known as the broad wall that's been discovered, left of it, that Hezekiah actually tried to rebuild the defences that were there. You read about that in 2 Chronicles. Also, he built a tunnel. You may have heard of it, Hezekiah's tunnel. And on the right-hand side, with the red lanyard round his neck, you'll see someone on a day one tour. So there you go. And here it is. You can go through and come out at the Siloam Pool. It was an amazing piece of engineering. You can see in red from the Gihon Spring down to the Pool of Siloam how it wended its way through the rock. And what they did, they had, as far as we can understand, 2 groups of workmen, one at each end, and they would be going through and they would listen to hear where they were. And so when they actually met up, they had this inscription carved, which is now in the Istanbul Museum, which you can see, which says about this wonderful engineering feat, but also how God had protected his people. So Hezekiah brings water into Jerusalem through this tunnel carved from half a kilometre of bedrock, as 2 Kings 20:20 tells us. So it's a great thing to go through. It's ideal for someone like me to go through because I'm short. Any of you who are taller than me, just beware when you go through Hezekiah's tunnel, otherwise you might clonk your head on the top. Here we have what's part of the Babylonian Chronicle, which records the capture of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. It's very precise, isn't it? The 16th of March, 597 BC, as 2 Kings 25 tells us. So when I see that there, 16th of March, 597 BC, I want to add 3 dots, beep, 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 after it. There you go. It's an amazing thing. Also, one of the kings who was taken to Babylon, Jehoiakim, we are told in the 2nd book of Kings, 24 through 25, that he was there and they fed him. And here's one of the food rations for him. Isn't that astonishing? There's something as mundane as a food ration for a foreigner that has been recorded. You may have heard of Belshazzar. People often talk about the writing on the wall, and they've got no idea what they're talking about. But it comes from the book of Daniel, where the king Belshazzar was judged by God. People say there is no king at all by that name, because the last king is called Nabonidus, so there can't have been a Belshazzar. Well, a discovery has been made. There's Nabonidus on the left, and here it is, this clay cylinder, and Nabonidus actually writes on there about Belshazzar, my firstborn, the offspring of my heart.
The size of it.
Oh, the size. Yes, it's very small. Yeah, about 5 inches. Can I use inches? Are you still doing inches? Or is it all metric? And so it's an amazing thing that the Bible is proved to be true yet again. Then you may have heard of someone called Cyrus. He was the great king of Persia who gave permission for exiles to return home and rebuild their cities and temples, particularly in Jerusalem, as 2 Chronicles 23 records. Not all the Jews went back. Some of them enjoyed living in Babylonia, as we know. Here we have Esther. She was, not actually her, but a reference to her. She was the queen to King Xerxes of Persia. And here he is on his throne. Now we've highlighted his gold scepter, because we're told there in the book of Esther, chapter 5, verse 2, Queen Esther standing in his court, he was pleased when he saw her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of his gold scepter. So isn't that amazing? Even something as mundane as that shows the truth of the scriptures. Indeed, he, Xerxes, is the king who's involved in... Have you ever seen the film The 300 or heard of it? So he's the one who took on, or the Spartans tried to take him on. So it's amazing. Here we have a cupbearer to another great king called Ashurnasirpal II of Assyria. And he has in his right hand the cup that his cupbearer has given to him. And Nehemiah was cupbearer to Artaxerxes I of Persia. So astonishingly, both in the British Museum and in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, we have the drinking bowls from the palace of Artaxerxes I. And if you go around the British Museum, even the museum staff will say, do you want to see Nehemiah's drinking bowl? Isn't that incredible? So if you can find, please, any fingerprints or DNA of Nehemiah, we can check it out on there. So I find that incredible. Then just to skip into the New Testament, the Emperor Caesar Augustus, after whom the month of August is named, as you all know, he had issued a decree that all the world should be taxed. And here is a census order from the time of another Roman Emperor, Trajan, in AD 104, ordering all to return to their homes for a census. So it shows that this was the policy that they had. Reflections from the ministry of Jesus, an alabastron, Matthew 26. Do you know the account in the Bible where a lady broke a precious perfume? In the middle is an actor's mask, hypocritai, Matthew 23. Jesus uses that perfectly when he says, you're not hypocritai, you are, what's the English word? Hypocrites. If you're a hypocrite, you're wearing the mask because you're not showing your true face. Jesus' teaching is brilliant, isn't it? The way he uses everyday things. And then a silver denarius from the time of Tiberius, which is very small indeed, Matthew 22, where Jesus said, show me a coin. And this is the sort of coin that he was shown. Then Jesus went to, someone was talking, I can't remember who it was, forgive me, Caesarea Philippi. In the niches that you see running round, there were statues to the god Pan. The god Pan is an awful god, a horrible god, but he was known as the All. And it was here, in the region of Caesarea Philippi, we're never told that Jesus actually went into it, that Jesus made that great statement about, I will build my church, and no one will stand against me. I'm stuck again. No, I'm not. There we are. And there is, at Caesarea Philippi, where they used to throw goats over the top there, that go down to what's known as the gates of hell. And what did Jesus say? The gates of hell will not triumph over my church. It's interesting, isn't it, how often we're discovering how relevant Jesus' teaching was. What have I done? I'm stuck. Phil? No. Is that where I finish then? Boing.
No, point it that way.
I point at Matthew, what happens? Look at that. So Matthew is the key. So this is a recent discovery. On the left-hand side, you'll see, it's not a very good picture, I'm sorry, but they've discovered this ring of Pontius Pilate. Now, if you can read, you may see the name of Pilate starts over here with the letter pi, P-I, the start of Pilate. And so archaeologists are really thrilled by that. And then we come here. This is one of the most moving places I've ever been. Whether or not it's the exact spot or not, it's a brilliant, brilliant place. It's known as Gordon's Calvary. What we find is Jesus was led out of the city and he was crucified outside the city wall. And quite a number of scholars think this is the location because it was called the place of the skull. So I hope you've got a good imagination to see, where am I? There I am. The eyes of the skull, the nose of the skull, the mouth of the skull. So maybe here is where Jesus was crucified. Today it's a bus station, and I love that. The message is going out to the whole world. So there you go. A book that we don't have for sale, but I recommend to you all, Colin J. Humphries, The Mystery of the Last Supper, where he dates, he's a professor from Cambridge University, so it must be true. Everything coming out of Cambridge is true, isn't it? And he's actually dated the crucifixion for us, and he does it brilliantly. It's a wonderful book to get. You can get it quite cheaply on Amazon, if I'm allowed to say that, or get it from the library. And he's worked out that 9 a.m. on Friday the 3rd of April, AD 33, is the date of what we would call Good Friday. And I think he's very accurate. Isn't that amazing? It wasn't that long ago that we had Good Friday on Friday the 3rd of April, and it will come around again. Now here, in what's known as the Nazareth Village, which is a brilliant place to visit, they have a mock-up of a cross, as you can see that there. I hope you can see it. This is a typical cross from the time of Jesus. Can you see that bit there? Now that's where the hands go, that's where the feet go. But here, the Romans called that the mercy seat, because you're there and you're struggling to breathe. So if you flex your limbs a little bit, you can sit on the mercy seat so as to get your breath back. Isn't it wicked? Absolutely wicked what they did. And it's an amazing thing to see. The only archaeological evidence at the moment, we have to say at the moment because they're always digging things out for evidence of crucifixion, is of a young man who was crucified through his ankle, you'll see there, or just above the ankle. A guy in our church, Professor Julian Evans, has done a wonderful book for Day One on trees of the Bible. I recommend it to you. And if ever you want another speaker like this, if you can ever endure it, well, he's a proper professor, so you can actually have him. And he works out that even the timber washer was deliberately chosen that the nail goes through, because it's the type of timber that compresses the wound to such an extent that it increases the pain in a man's foot. What the Lord Jesus went through for us, well, we don't really know, and probably best we don't.
Can I interrupt there as well? It also stops the blood flow, so you won't bleed out.
Yep, very good. So just go to a couple of other things. This glorious gospel, as you'll see in the bottom there, Jerusalem, it went out round the whole world from the day of Pentecost. And so if you'll see all the different places that are marked up on there, Cilicia, Galatia, Phrygia, that are mentioned in Acts chapter 2. And here we see Paul goes out. The gospel went out to Antioch, and then up to Tarsus, where Paul was from, and then you go all the way around Derbe and all the way across. And then at a place there at Troas, Paul received a vision. Come over to Macedonia and help us. So it's amazing. You'll see it going across the Aegean Sea. He goes across to Neapolis and then Philippi. So he goes across in a response to that. And it's the exact reverse of the journey that Alexander the Great made. I find this incredible. Alexander the Great went to conquer the whole world. And he left from there and went to Troas. And he actually went through virtually the same distance. But Paul went to conquer with the gospel, which is glorious to consider. So here is Neapolis. It's Cavalla today. If you go there, and if you forget everything else, just underneath this building here is the best fished restaurant in the world. All right? You go there and they cook the most incredible fish. That I hope you like fish, by the way. And you can have chips as well, if you want. But it's a beautiful place. And then the ancient roadway goes up and over the hills, the actual roadway that Paul walked, because it's the only one to go, as he went on his missionary journey. So as he came, he ended up in Philippi. You can see the theatre top right. Then they show you what they say is Paul's prison. I don't think it is. If you go there, I think it was an old wine store. So it's not big enough for a prison, as we read about in Acts. I think he was probably imprisoned. Over on the left-hand side, you'll see some columns there. I think it was near there that the prison was. And this is the area where he was beaten as well. When he went there, and then he went back and he sang praise to God, didn't he? Who was he with? Did anyone know? Silas, yeah. Then he journeys down to Thessaloniki, and it is here in what's known as the Agora, or the Forum. Other Jews were jealous, so they rounded up some bad characters in the marketplace, formed a mob and started a riot in the city. They rushed to Jason's house in search of Paul and Silas in order to bring them out to the crowd, but Jason suffered. And you can actually go to that exact spot. It's, again, fantastic. Then if you go right the way down, you end up at Corinth, and you end up at the ruins of the theatre that's there. That's the Acro Corinth behind. And then you'll see on the left, or at least at the bottom and on the left, the inscription reads, Erastus the treasurer laid the pavement at his own expense. And so should just, hopefully you can see it, Erastus, Erastus, that's there. And he's mentioned in Romans 16 verse 23. There's a boring list of names in Romans 16. They're not so boring when you realise they're actual people who actually existed. And some of them are mentioned in the scriptures. Then on his journeys he went to Athens, the famous Acropolis, and near there is what's known as Mars Hill. And you'll go there and it's fantastic. You'll see a lady on the left, there's stone steps. When you do go, do not attempt to walk up them. They are so slippery that you'll come down faster than you went up. So be very careful, there is a metal staircase to the left. But you'll notice there in the middle, on the right, there is an inscription. And here it is. And they've written out in Greek all that Paul said as recorded in the Acts of the Apostles. Isn't that incredible? He being dead yet speaketh. And so you can go there, and I think it's a fabulous place. I recommend it to you. So I'll finish here because you've all been very tolerant. If Colin Humphries has got it right, then the date of the resurrection from the dead is Sunday the 5th of April AD 33. If Christ had not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith, 1 Corinthians 15:14. But Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, 1 Corinthians 15:20. And this is the famous garden tomb in Jerusalem, which probably is not the actual tomb of Jesus, but it's the best visual aid I have ever seen. I recommend it to you. A reverend gentleman, the Reverend White, superintended there for many years, and he tells the story how one day an American tourist came in. They asked him, how did you know it was an American tourist? He said, because he was covered in cameras, so I knew that. And the guy was short of time, and he ran round, and he came back and he said to the Reverend White, he said, so what's so special about this place? I haven't got long, I'm out of breath and I've got to go. And all the Reverend White did, he pointed to the tomb and he said, what's special? It's empty. Isn't that wonderful? That is the truth. So I don't know, we talk about evidence for the Bible, there's many things I could have shown you. Whether or not it will persuade you in the truth of the Bible, more importantly in the truth of God or not. But I consider you sensible if you think about what is happening in life. All of us are going to die. What happens when we die? I don't believe in God. I don't believe you'll ever know if there's a God or not. I think we will the second we die. If there's not a God, then we just go into oblivion, so good night. But if there is a God, which one is it? What has he required from us? And we ought to take these things really seriously. So you've been very kind in listening. We have this book here, Evidence for the Bible, based with many other things, as we said there, for sale for £13 instead of £25. You see, it's Christmas, everyone gets a gift. And I'm ever so sorry. This is the next one in the thing. It was due out, it was going to be delivered to us, and it won't be delivered to us until next, probably Tuesday or Thursday, so unless you come to see me, I can't get it to you. So if you'd like a copy, and there's both Brian and myself, and there's this wonderful guy called Chris Sinkinson, who's too good to be true. He's a lecturer at Moorlands College, he's an archaeologist, he's just superb. And so if any of you would like a copy, do you know what your pastor's name is here? Good. Tell Matt, and he will try and organise it and get the best discount this side of the planet Saturn. So thank you all for listening. You've been very tolerant. God bless you. And in case I don't see you again, may you have a happy Christmas.
Thank you.
What, you want to answer some questions, do you?
No, if anyone's got any questions, but you've run out of time.
Yeah, you've got to buy books.
Well, did anyone have any pressing questions? Or
So
any...
Matt can answer them.
Yeah. No? Okay. Well,
excellent.
Just remains for me to say thank you very much for coming.
Pleasure.
And, I presume you'll hang around for a few minutes so people can talk to you. And yeah. Okay. Well, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the things we've heard. We thank you.